take a look at a poster from the 19th century, shall we? This poster in particular was a part of the chapbook collection. It is called The Blue Lady, and it was published by Stone and Kimball in 1894 and designed by Will H. Bradley. Bradley was a freelance artist and illustrator that designed later in his life for Collier's Weekly, another magazine that began in the 1880s, much like the chapbook collection. You may notice that it seems very different from our poster that we may see today in any young adult's bedroom or even an office. Posters started to become very popular in the 19th century and have only become more so since. Their original purpose was to persuade and inform people of enlisting opportunities for the army, propaganda, business advertising, and political recognition in elections even. They were made on paper, as posters are today, but instead of the many different fonts and texts and sizes and colors we have the ability to utilize now using electronic devices like computers and printers and keyboards, they used what was called woodblock lettering. It was a style of writing that was more like using a stamp to press the letters onto the paper rather than writing out with ink or a pen. The reason woodblock lettering was used is because on early 19th century posters, it was all words and no images, but a lot of color. The point was to get the maximum amount of information on one poster. Remember, the purpose of these posters was to persuade and inform with facts and words and not simply popular culture or paraphernalia. The other part of the poster making process was that it was supposed to be very eye-catching so that people would see the poster and want to learn more about what was on it. Posters were an exercise in advertisement, and because they were used to inform, they also needed to be able to be very eye-catching and noticeable by consumers and people who were affected by the posters. The point was to be able to pass this poster to anyone and everyone around that could read, and while also being dramatic and dazzling enough to get the attention of the people holding it so that they may give it to somebody else and start the whole cycle over again. If we take a look at a modern day poster selection, you may find posters of boy bands, musicals, songs, artists, movies and television, science and anatomical practices, and so much more. Pretty much any topic that's out there, you could create into a poster of your own liking and your own design. The purpose of these is much more for entertainment and collection rather than for informative reasons. Though some are still used today for informative reasons, more on the anatomical and science side, still not as many. There was a function for posters in the 1800s. They were passed around and were much smaller than the posters of the 21st century, which had much less functionality, but it adds to the decor and enjoyment of a room. So what changed? Why did the idea of collecting informational posters become so popular in the 19th century? It was nearly like every other trend that's in history. It just started, it began. One man was quoted, "The little man who talked to me said yes, he had a few posters that he received occasionally from the American News Company in bundles with his papers and periodicals and from Eastern publishers. He had no use for them, but thinking them too pretty to throw away, he put them as they came into a large drawer under the counter. People began to find beauty and to have a desire to collect posters. For what reason? One, they could be possibly resold. This was the beginning of upscaling and reselling something for profit of something as small as a poster and minuscule. Most would not think to sell something like a poster when it was more of just informational value rather than a collector's item. Posters that were once created for informational purposes and enlisting persuasion were now being collected for free and resold for money to other buyers. This became a problem, and people began to charge for posters. They became less wordy and began to include more images and representation that would entice people to want to buy them. What once was descriptive and used for spreading the word of various ideas became something that was collected as pop culture and memorabilia as they are today. This became an incredible opportunity for people like Will H. Bradley, the freelance designer who created the Blue Lady. The poster we're speaking of. The chapbook posters started this man's career as an artist, designer, and printer. This new activity of creating and selling posters created chances for people to start a business and keep up a living in a difficult time, like the 1900s. This also created opportunities for designers and politicians to work together to manipulate situational information in the use of propaganda. Because posters started to become something that people not only listened to, admired, and collected, it also meant that people were more persuaded than ever, especially now that they were pictures and colors that manipulated emotions in an easier way. So, to sum up our time here, we can understand that posters became a popular piece of memorabilia much earlier than we think they did. This was not something that happened in the 20th century, much earlier, in fact, about 100 years, though the trend did not stop into the 21st century. Being originally created to spread the word about all kinds of different events and opportunities, it turned into a movement of purchasing and collecting posters for enjoyment. Do not think that they were not still posters that were created for the sole purpose of advertising products, because there were, but they became collected as all the others were. People began to learn how to manipulate the text and images to get different responses from their viewers. Advertising became even more important than ever. Not only did it give people another hobby to collect or to create, but also more people to sell and create a living with their talents in advertising and design and illustration. The advertising industry in America was forever changed because of a trend and a few freelance designers. Can you imagine? The poster on your wall was started because of a trend in the 1900s. Let's move on, shall we? Thank you for your time.